Hi, welcome to chapter 24 of our book, The Boy at the Back of the Class. Chapter 24 is called The Interview. Although Brendan the bully wasn't bullying Armet anymore, and Mr. Irons was gone, I was still feeling worried. 8 whole days had passed since our emergency adventure, and Armet's parents still hadn't been found. And even though Mrs. Sanders had said the Queen couldn't really help us, I knew that deep down we were all still hoping she would do something. The hardest thing was trying to make Armet understand that the Queen hadn't been able to help. Every morning, as soon as he would see us in the playground, he would ask, "The Queen will find today, yes?" After a few days of trying to tell him no and seeing him look sad, we began to shrug and say, "Maybe," as hopefully as we could. "The gates will have been shut last Friday," said Josie quietly, as she gave her ponytail an angry pull. Even though we didn't usually have PE on Thursdays, Mrs. Khan had decided to treat us, so we were all sitting on a bench waiting for the climbing frame and feeling sad. "Armet, your turn," said Tom, pointing to the free space at the climbing frame. Armet ran over to the bars and leapt up to the highest rung he could reach. He was as good at climbing as he was at football. When I asked him how he could jump so high and climb so fast, he shrugged and said, "Fences." "If the gates are shut already, and no one's helping us to find Armet's family, why do you think the reporters are still here?" asked Michael, carefully patting the sides of his afro so that it would stay in place when it was his turn at the climbing frame. It was a question all of us had been asking ourselves, because even though there were fewer reporters than last week, they were all still asking us questions about Armet whenever they saw us. "Maybe they think we'll try and do something else to help Armet find his family, and they're just waiting to see what it is," suggested Josie. For the rest of the day, we tried our best not to think about the reporters and the newspaper appeal and the Queen. But on the way back home, a reporter suddenly shouted out, "Kids, what do you think of Mr. Fry's views about refugee children like Armet?" And another one shouted, "Do you have a response? Do you want to say something back to him?" We all said, "No comment," just like we always did, but we gave each other a puzzled look. None of us knew who Mr. Fry was, or what he had to do with us and Armet, but we promised each other we would try and find out that night. When I got home that afternoon, I found lots more reporters in front of my flat. It was strange because there used to be only 1 or 2 before, but now there were at least 50, and they were all shouting questions at me about Mr. Fry. I ran past all of them just as fast as I could, and saw Mum standing just inside the main door looking out for me. "Mum!" I cried out, running up and hugging her as she quickly buzzed the door open. "You're home early!" Mum hugged me back and hurried me inside. When we got to our flat, I could see the television was on, which was another sign that something odd was happening, because Mum only really watches the telly at night. Quickly switching off the telly, Mum bent down to look at me closely and asked, "Are you okay? It can be scary having so many people chasing you and asking questions." I nodded. "But Mum, why are you home early?" Mum stroked my cheek before replying, "Because I need you to do something really important and help us all to help Armet." Motioning for me to sit down at the kitchen table, Mum placed a large peanut butter sandwich in front of me and a glass of milk. My stomach gave a growl because it likes peanut butter sandwiches the best, even though they make my mouth go sticky. "Darling, do you know who Mr. Fry is? He came to your school once, a long time ago. He's our local MP." I frowned and shook my head. "But the reporters were asking about him." Mum nodded. "I bet they were," she said, shaking her head as she sat down opposite me. Grabbing some newspapers from the kitchen counter, she spread them out in front of me. "This is why," she said. Her voice was calm, but her cheeks were pink, so I could tell she was cross about something. I looked down at the newspapers. They were all different, but all of them had the same picture on the front page. It was of a man with grey hair wearing a dark suit and a blue tie, and above him in big letters were headlines like "No More! Refugee Influx Flooding Britain!" and "Britain's Needs Must Come First!" and "MP Fry labels Buckingham Palace kids radical refugee terrorists." My heart beat fast at the last headline, but before I could read anything else, Mum gathered the newspapers back up again. "Let's put these aside for now, darling. I don't want you to read the articles, because most of it's just silly nonsense." I watched as Mum turned to put the newspapers back onto the counter and then faced me again. "The reason I showed you them is because I wanted you to see the kinds of headlines Mr. Fry has helped create today, and for you to understand that there are some people like him who think refugee children like Ahmet shouldn't be allowed into the country." "But why not, Mum?" I asked, feeling angry. "They haven't done anything wrong." "I know that, and I'm sure deep down they know that too. But remember what we said about some people being afraid of anyone different to them." "So you mean Mr. Fry and all the people like him are just like Mr. Greggs?" I asked, scrunching up my nose as if the name smelled. "Yes, exactly," grinned Mum. After a few seconds, the grin disappeared. "And there's also something else you need to know. Mr. Fry, you see, has said it was Ahmet who made you and Tom go to Buckingham Palace that day and—" "But that's a lie!" I cried out, feeling my cheeks beginning to burn. "I know it is, darling, and so do lots of other people. But that's why I've had a long talk on the phone with Mrs. Sanders and, well, we've come up with a plan." I sat up and, pushing my sandwich plate away, told my ears to listen extra carefully, because any plan of my mum's would be the best plan ever. "Now, we think that people like Mr. Fry shouldn't be on the front pages of any newspapers. It's your story and Ahmet's story that people need to hear. So, how would you feel about talking to a reporter today and telling them all about your letter to the Queen and Ahmet trying to find his family, and all the things that you've done for each other?" "But you told me to say no comment." "I know I did," said Mum. "I wanted to protect you, and Ahmet too, but when people like Mr. Fry start telling lies, it's time to speak out." "So you mean I should tell them about the greatest idea in the world, and the emergency plan, and the Queen, and everything?" I asked, feeling both scared and excited. "Yes," said Mum, "but it won't just be you on your own. Tom and Josie and Michael and Ahmet will be with you too, and you can all share your story together." I clapped my hands. "Mum, that's the best plan in the whole world." Mum laughed, and getting up said, "I'm glad you think so. Now, finish that sandwich and let's get back to school. Mrs. Sanders had suggested we hold the interview in your classroom, so we need to be there in—" Mum looked at her watch. "Half an hour. Plenty of time for you to wash your face and look your best too. Chop chop." I gobbled down my peanut butter sandwich, gulped down my glass of milk, scrubbed my face, brushed my hair, polished my school shoes, and checking I had the greatest idea in the world with me in my rucksack, got Mum to tie my school tie extra neatly. I thought I had done everything in 3 minutes, but then Mum said, "That was good for 10 minutes, which made me look at the clock and shake my head at it. As we headed downstairs to the main door, Mum grabbed my hand and said, "We're going to have to run very fast to the bus stop, okay? Let's pretend all the journalists are zombies out to get us." I nodded, and grabbing Mum's hand tightly, I tried to tell my heart to stop thumping so loudly, because there weren't really any zombies around. I ran just as fast as I could, pulling Mum behind me. I heard her say, "In a rush, no comment," until we reached the bus stop. When we got to school and walked into our classroom, Tom and Michael and Josie were already there with their parents, and Ahmet with his foster mum, and Miss Hempsey too. Mrs. Khan was talking to 2 people I had never seen before, but Michael told us that one was a lawyer and the other one was a caseworker. "What do you think they're all talking about?" asked Josie, looking at the grown-up standing in the corner and whispering. "Probably about that horrible MP who's saying Ahmet made us go to Buckingham Palace," I said. Really? Asked Josie. Mum and Dad didn't tell me anything about that. They just said if I helped tell the story we would get some money for a proper holiday. Just then, Mrs. Sanders walked in, and followed by a woman in a suit and a man with a camera. "It's them," whispered Josie loudly. "The reporters." "Everyone," said Mrs. Sanders, waving them forward. "This is Miss Hall and Mr. Myers." We all looked up at Miss Hall and Mr. Myers, who smiled and waved at us. "And this is Ahmet's caseworker, Mrs. Khalid," said Mrs. Khan, pointing at the woman in the glasses standing next to Michael's mum. We all smiled. "Let's begin, shall we?" clapped Mrs. Sanders. "First, Miss Hall is going to speak to the four of you about the greatest idea in the world. And then she's going to speak to Ahmet, with Miss Hempsey's help, of course. And Mr. Myers will be filming you all. And then we'll take some nice pictures of the plans. Have you got them?" "Right here," said Mum, holding up my rucksack. After Mrs. Sanders and everyone had finished fussing over our hair and collars and jumpers and ties, we all sat in a row and the interview began. It only lasted 10 minutes, but it felt like much, much longer. Miss Hall asked us what made Ahmet so special and why we had wanted to help him. It was hard answering more than one question at the same time, especially with so many grown-ups and a large camera staring at us. But Tom said it was because Ahmet was the only boy he had ever met who had seen real bombs and guns and had been fast enough to run away from them. And Michael said anyone who had walked millions of miles to come to school deserved to be helped. And Josie said that Ahmet was the best footballer she had ever seen, even better than her, and that it wasn't fair that he didn't know where his parents were. And I said that Ahmet was the bravest person I had ever met, because even though he had run away from a real-life war and found it hard to speak English and missed his family all the time, he was still the best kind of friend anyone could have. After that, Miss Hall asked us about the greatest idea in the world and the emergency plan. So we showed her and the camera the drawings and talked about how we had gone to the Queen for help because we thought she could do anything. "Are you disappointed that the Queen hasn't contacted you?" asked Miss Hall. We all nodded. "What would you say to her if you could? In fact, what would you say to everyone out there listening to you today?" asked Miss Hall. "That the gates need to be kept open," said Tom without hesitating. "Yeah," said Michael, "they should be kept open for everyone like Ahmet." "And everyone needs to help Ahmet find his parents," said Josie, "because it's not their fault they've gone missing." Miss Hall nodded and looked at me, waited for an answer. I wanted to say lots and lots of things to the Queen and the Prime Minister, but instead I said, I think we should all help anyone who's a refugee, just like my Grandma Jo did." I heard Mum gasp, and Miss Hall leant forward. "Your Grandma Jo helped refugees too?" she asked, looking interested. I nodded. "In the World War, the second one." "And how did she help them?" asked Miss Hall gently. I looked over at Mum, who nodded at me, her eyes wide and watery. "She ran away from the Nazi people, and then she helped other people run away from them too." Miss Hall cleared her throat, and giving me a smile, turned to Ahmet to ask him about all the things he had seen and what he had run away from. I watched as Miss Hempsey helped him translate what he wanted to say into English, but I liked his last answer the best. Because when Miss Hall asked him how he felt about what we had done, he looked at us and without any help said, "I happy to have best friends on planet." And just like that, I knew the answer to my very last question. When we got home that night, Mum tucked me into bed and said she was proud of me, and that wherever Dad and Grandma Jo were, they were very proud of me too. In fact, I think if Grandma Jo were alive today, she'd give you a big fat kiss and tell you exactly what she told your dad when he was your age, said Mum, stroking my hair. What was that, Mum? That the entire world is full of hearts searching for a place to call home. But refugees are different, because they don't just look for a home, they look for peace too. And because of that, they possess the most special hearts anyone could ever have. Hearing about what my Grandma Jo had said to my dad made me so happy that I couldn't sleep for a really long time. Not until I heard an owl hooting from somewhere very far away. The next morning, I woke up extra early and jumped out of bed. I thought Mum might still be asleep, but she was sitting at the kitchen table drinking tea, and in front of her was a newspaper. "Morning," she said, smiling as her mug of tea steamed up her glasses. "Thought I'd run out and get the paper. Look." She held it out to me. Staring back at me from the front page was a picture of me and Tom and Josie and Michael, all sitting in a row. Tom and me were holding up the greatest idea in the world, and Josie and Michael were holding up the emergency plan. Next to it was an even bigger picture of Ahmet smiling, and above all our heads in big bold letters were the words, "Ahmet, the most famous refugee boy in the world. Exclusive, the children behind the Buckingham Palace protest." "Come over here, you," said Mum, opening her arms. "Let's read it together, shall we? School isn't for another 2 hours, so we have lots of time." Squeezing onto Mum's chair, I read the article with her. It ran onto 2 whole pages, but I liked the bits where Ahmet was speaking the best. He spoke about his family and where they might be, and how he dreamed of being a footballer one day. But he also spoke about his sister being in the sea, and how hard it was being bullied, and having horrible songs being sung about him. "I hope that shuts up all the other bullies too," muttered Mum angrily when she read that bit. "Mum, look!" I cried. As we turned over the page to read the second half of the article, "There's you!" I leaned forward to see the picture better. Mum was standing next to Tom's parents, and Michael's parents, and Josie's parents, and Ahmet's foster mum, and the words underneath said, "Parents unite to fight against racism and champion refugee rights. Racists like MP Fry have no right to tear innocent families apart." "Mum," I asked, after we finished reading the whole article, "Do you think the Queen and the Prime Minister and the border people will see this? Do you think they might all try and help now?" Mum squeezed me tight. "I don't know, darling, but what I do know is that by sharing our story, lots more people will be talking about it, and that has to be a good thing." I put my hands down on the newspaper and then had another thought. "And do you think it might make people like Mr. Fry and Mr. Greggs be less scared of Ahmet?" "I'm not sure," said Mum, smiling, "but when it comes to people, you just never know." I didn't know about Mr. Fry and Mr. Greggs, but on the way to school that day, Josie said that after her mum and dad had listened to Ahmet's story, they had told her she had been right to make friends with him. And that made me have a thought. Maybe it didn't matter if really horrible people like Mr. Fry or Mr. Greggs didn't like Ahmet. Maybe they didn't even deserve to know him. But people like Josie's mum and dad did, because they weren't horrible at all. They had just been nervous about making a new friend. And that's the end of chapter 24. Chapter 25 is called The Queen's Message. I'm going to read that later today.